Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here today to talk about my latest interview with Captain Mark Richards of the Secret Space program called Total Recall 12 Space Command. And I conducted this interview on the 16th of February. I then spoke at a conference a few days later, and actually about a week later, and then I traveled back here. So it's been a short while. About a week and a half since I did the interview. A lot has been going on, and we did cover a number of topics. I'm using a PowerPoint presentation here to make it easier for people to follow along, and so you can also access this on my website if you wish. And what I always do is go to Solano Prison, and I've been doing this interview now for around 5 years, and this is again the 12th interview. I am accompanied by his wife Joanne Richards, who helps to facilitate the interview. And because I am not doing this as an official journalist, because journalists are denied from interviewing him, and Oprah tried many years ago and was denied access. So what I do is go in as a friend, and I am not allowed to take a recording device of any kind. I end up getting a tiny pencil, and I'm able to use that to do the interview. So I have to recall on my memory, so I call these total recall. And basically that prison had been on lockdown for the 2 weeks prior because of a killing in the prison. And Mark was quite tired this time when I interviewed him. Apparently all the things going on has been quite draining over those few weeks. And so that's the kind of thing that does go on. It's possible he was also under attack, but he did not reveal anything about that. So I do want to say that, first of all, we talked about the backtracking on disclosure, and the fact that I had been in England over the holidays, right before returning on January 12th. That night, before it was around 11:30 at night, we nearly had a head-on with a black SUV Range Rover that was in a 2-lane road and had come over to our lane and was headed straight for us. We managed to avoid it at the last minute. The driver did not seem to realize they were on our side of the road at any time, and actually appeared to be programmed. So I believe the SUV was headed for us as a kind of a warning, possibly because of my sudden interest in revisiting the Rendlesham Forest sighting and landing that went on for several days, and I did ask Mark Richards about it in my interview. So that's very interesting what happened with regard to that. We basically talked about how disclosure recently, the last year, has been more or less sidelined and slowed, even though there have been some documents come out which have to do with the Admiral Wilson documents, supposed leaked documents, and also the information around documents related to the alien autopsy that Kit Green was involved in, him changing his story, actually backing off of his story after all these years, and other sort of things that have been released in the mainstream, like the Tic Tac story, that are basically a kind of a disinfo. And Mark fully agrees that disclosure seems to have been hightailed in a sense, and he said there were several individuals who were planning to come forward and tell the truth. However, now they have changed their mind, and they're moving back out of the limelight and will not be coming forward at this time, simply because the climate has turned. And so that's a very important thing. And then the reason for the awareness appears to be that audiences are raising awareness exponentially at this time. It's gone far beyond expectation. Those in power are fearful of the situation and consequently are cracking down. of course, this latest four-way, of course, this latest move into what is basically this. So there's a big push not to allow advertisers to have advertisements on alternative people that are talking about this subject. And therefore, I'm going to be using this silly sign in place of that word so that we can get this monetized so that I can still pay my rent and also still discuss the topic. So this is the kind of censorship going on YouTube nowadays, and everyone is aware of it. So this is widely known. So there is a rollout of a step-by-step program related to decreasing populations, and the step one is triggered by 5G, and that rollout now appears to be having an added sort of complexity level that involves this rollout. So the two are really linked, and I've done another video on this that has been getting out there quite well. I can say the chemtrails and nano are also part of that concoction. This is a plan. There's also, according to Mark, the step two will be more earth changes that are man-made and a set of droughts that are going to be creating limitations on resources, especially water, and limitations on travel. So these are key items to keep in mind going forward. So regarding Rendlesham, we had a fascinating discussion, and I had received a psychic message telling me to revisit the case. It happened in 1980. A lot of the witnesses have started to change their stories, have been changing their stories, have been in conflict with each other, and are suspicious of each other. And there's a lot of evidence of mind control between the witnesses and among them. So this grabbed my interest, and I interviewed Brenda Butler, as I say. She's one of the top researchers in the case, and that was just prior to when I left the UK in January. That interview is available on my website and highly recommended on YouTube as well. So I have invited all of the Rendlesham witnesses, as many as I could find, to interviews on my channel, but nobody has responded with the exception of Peter Robbins, who is planning to come on my show in about a week. And so, again, that attempt on our lives happened basically 24 hours after my live interview with Brenda Butler. Now, regarding Rendlesham, there is a presence behind the scene of the usual suspects regarding mind control, and that is the names that I've got listed here, and they show up time and time again with regard to cover-ups, and that includes the alien autopsy, the takedown of Richard Nixon, our president, back in those days, and also to do with the Admiral Wilson papers, supposed disclosure that actually is containing a lot of sort of disinfo at the same time as information, and also a misdirect in order to kind of get people off the subjects. And I have done quite a bit of analysis of the Admiral Wilson papers on my website in a presentation, as a matter of fact, and also a presentation at my conference last year, 2019, that you can watch on my Vimeo channel, that has all of the presentations of all of my yearly Awake and Aware conferences. So highly recommend that you take a look at that if you're at all interested. And these individuals are highly remote, are remote viewers, involved in remote viewing, involved in the origination or putting together the protocols with Ingo Swann of the original remote viewing protocols. And this involved Scientology practices as well. So it's important to know that all of that is just information, a way of packaging information, a way of using your psychic abilities in a certain controlled way to access events and future, past, and present events, things going on that are what we call signal non-locality and spooky action at a distance. These are all terms related to that. And there's a lot of information and investigations that have been done around this. It also has been around from time immemorial, not under these names, but certainly practiced by dark magicians and light magicians everywhere, witches, warlocks, you name it, around the globe, just for eons. So it's important to know this. This is not new. It has simply been put into a kind of a protocol, and Scientology has also been instrumental. So it was Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, and L. Ron Hubbard were contemporaries and knew each other back in the day. And there's evidence that these protocols actually came out of their work, and as I say, from the past. So, with regard to what is going on with UFO secrecy and the Rendlesham case, Mark said that the reason there's such a cover-up of the Rendlesham case is that there were over 200 people affected in the radius of the incidents, that the aliens were attempting to land. Had been their second or third attempt to make contact with humans. They did not look humanoid. And in this landing attempt, they used telepathy to communicate with around 200 people. He said there were both civilians and military in attendance, and that lends itself to the idea that the landing was pre-arranged. And this also went over a period of 8 days as opposed to the 3 that are usually talked about. He said that the fact that there were both British and U.S. military as well as civilians, and both from the UN and on the British side, certainly indicates a kind of a greeting party, if you will. When the aliens projected the images into the humans' minds, a lot of the humans couldn't handle it. What they were projecting were images not only of themselves, but also of other races they've encountered, and also other planets altogether. And this sort of package of telepathic information freaked the Americans and the British and all those in attendance out. Apparently the military was able to handle it better than the civilians, needless to say. The images simply were just an overload. And when that happened, a lot of the humans never recovered. Their memories were wiped afterwards, I guess through military mind control. Attempts were made in that regard. Some of those humans lost their minds and never recovered. Then there was also an exchange of fire, because when there was an overload from the aliens to the humans reacted, and then the aliens reacted because the humans reacted, and there was an emotional overload that went to these artificial intelligence that the aliens brought with them, who then reacted to the overload of emotional energy, and apparently one side or the other opened fire. I'm not sure which. There was friendly fire as well, and individuals died. And I assume individuals on both sides were possibly killed, although I didn't get information directly about how many aliens were killed in that situation. So this was collateral damage as a result. The initial intention was friendly, according to Mark Richards. The aliens misinterpreted the impact that these images would have on the population, obviously. And Mark also said he has met a man near Salinas, California, who was an MP at the time, was in attendance on the Rendlesham meeting and landing, and he said he's never regained his memories completely, but lost his mind and never recovered from that either. And that this was so that this was covered up in a huge way, and all of the witnesses have been subjected to mind wipes and targeting, mind control, etc. And Mark would not describe the actual race, what they look like, but said that regardless of how strange looking they were, that it wasn't the images of them that actually freaked the humans out quite so much. It was more the images of the other planets and other beings, and perhaps getting it all at once, that freaked the humans out. And actually, before I leave that, so this is very interesting, because this is why we have such a mess when it comes to the Rendlesham story, and all of the individuals who are having different understandings and memories, and I guess some might even be having some what you might call bleed-throughs coming through at this time. It happened in 1980, so that is about 40 years ago. It's crazy to think of, but 40 years ago. So there are still people starting maybe even to recover their memories, and this is the kind of thing going on. So if you can multiply this, because we've had so many beings coming here, and obviously there have been greeting parties, and obviously there have been snafus of this sort, and there have been what we can understand to be friendly fire. Also, obviously people dying by misunderstanding the various races that are visiting us. This is part of the reason the military will not share what's really going on here on planet Earth with humanity. However, in my view, of course, that we have a right to know. In fact, it's crucial that we know. And of course, many of us are having contact of our own, repeated contact. We're being abducted, etc. We're being messed with genetically. So we're all interacting with aliens, whether in a setup situation like Rendlesham or not. So in my view, the military industrial complex, the secret government, secret space programs really need to rethink this, so that humans can begin to realize that we are indeed not alone, which I believe many are at this time. So the next topic we talked about is this, and it's obviously here on my slide, but also put it here so you can see what we're going to talk about. And he talked, this is on again the 16th of February, so things are escalating and moving along. I've done, as I say, a video that I think was well received and has a lot of crucial information on the video, as well as on a page on my site with the same title, so you can get information there. Obviously, there's a lot of good work being done. There's no doubt there is a link up with 5G. So, but many months prior to this whole occurrence and breakout of this so-called virus, basically there was a plan, according to Mark, to eliminate 500 million of Chinese. This was their plan. This was leaked to Mark and I guess a certain group that he works with in the military, and they were going to try to dissuade China of going down this path. Obviously, they failed. He said that this was the first step only in the plan. The plan is, he says, to get rid of 250,000 people this year, mainly in China, but possibly other places as well. There's no doubt that this version is a bioweapon. It is unstable. It will mutate, and it is triggered as well by 5G. And Mark was not clear on whether that was the case. A lot of investigation has been done recently. There's evidence, even in the documentation behind 5G, saying that it will, that oxygen is actually, it attracts oxygen. tracks 5G. Somehow there's some kind of relationship there between the frequencies of 5G and oxygen, and that as a consequence, humans around it will have trouble breathing. This was brought forward by one of my interviewees, Mark Steele, who did a presentation at My Awaken Aware in 2019. Again, you can get that on Vimeo. And he was already making that connection. And I can say that anything respiratory is going to be front and center in this situation. So as of February 16th, the numbers Mark had was 100,000 humans were involved. He said 30% had died, 30% were infected, and 40% were taken off-world and shipped to other planets by the reptilians for food and as sex slaves and so forth. And that this is something that he talks about often, this kind of relationship between the reptilians, the Draco, the Chinese, and various other regimes out there, including the Russians. And we are fighting a battle here on planet Earth against their interference here on the planet, as well as their plans to terraform this planet. So none of this is really actually all that new. The added element, of course, of 5G has escalated the symptoms and the situation. But the rollout of chemtrails, the implantation of nano in the chemtrails and in our bodies is all part of the agenda. The push to make a transhuman agenda and also change the environment here on planet Earth to make it a more methane-like environment. All of this has been covered by Project Camelot in my interviews, in my presentations for many years. So reptilians and Draco are assisting China with their population reduction plans. According to Mark, China doesn't need help from the West to eliminate population, and they are perfectly capable of doing this on their own. So anyone who thinks that China is a victim in this scenario is wrong. There are opportunists out there that are taking advantage of this rollout of, obviously, this and more, are basically using the weaponized and mutation of it to attack their own people. It is no coincidence that the highest rates of CV are also showing up around the world in places where 5G has been installed. And the East, the Far East, has been front and center. Of course, Huawei, instrumental in rolling out 5G. 5G is known to have all kinds of adverse health effects. This is only part of it. Again, if you go back to my interview with Mark Steele, he really zeroed in on the fact that that 5G is a weapons program widely used by the military for many years. The health effects on humans are known, although they are not publicized, and except by the alternative media, obviously. So the other thing we talked about is AI and the transhumanist agenda. In the past, Mark has talked about 6 AI that are currently invading our planet, and this is alien AI, in addition to the AI that we are creating here, some of which has already been reverse engineered or based on alien AI that was installed in the planet. For example, as part of the Nazca aliens, that there's clear indication going about thousands of years ago that we have had AI already visiting our planet, etc. And I do go into that in other presentations. I can say that there's also the black goo, which is a well-known form of AI that was placed here on our planet from an alien race, and that information is also researchable. So at any rate, we talked about that humans are slated to become partially AI, a transhumanist species at this time, although Mark feels that the transhumanist agenda will not be allowed to happen because he believes there's enough military men like himself that are against it. And there's the biggest issue is they cannot tell exactly when we move from being AI from being human to being AI. And there's a point at which you become more AI than you become human, obviously. And he also said that he believes, as I do, and as I wrote in my book that I released recently called Rebel Gene, Secret Space and the Future of Humanity, that we contain within this genome, within this vessel, all these abilities anyway, and all they have to do is be activated. So this gets into the robotic Superman versus angelic human dilemma that the secret space program has been struggling with all these years, and their decision, even going back to the time of the Nazis, who are also instrumental in our secret space program, indicate a choice that chooses the robotic Superman and or what you might call a transhumanist choice. So the idea being that they don't want to wait to jumpstart all of the abilities that come natural to us. Although there are things like mutations, the X-Men scenario, and we'll get into all of that. So this program involved in super soldiers, etc., has been going on at least in the United States since the 60s. Obviously, the Nazis were involved before that. It involves intellectual, emotional, psychic, and physical enhancements. And we don't need to be augmented, according to Mark Richards, to fight the good fight against AI or RET enemies. We have amazing powers not yet realized. And this gets into things like creating autistic children who are natural precogs, and this has been going on for quite a while. And here at Camelot, we've talked about that in the past as well. So he said that there's a Draco battle in the Orion Galaxy, and a lot of what has been happening on Earth has to do with that battle. In that battle, the Draco are fighting with the Raptors, and the Raptors have recruited 1 million humans who are fighting with them against the Draco. At the same time, the Draco and the reptilians report to the Draco, are working with China in order to distract the Raptors here on Earth and occupy them and to take their attention away from here on Earth and to get them to fight in this battle in the Orion Galaxy, and so that they can take over Earth. So it's a takeover scenario. This is a kind of battle going on between what we call good and evil, but it's really a transhumanist agenda in the end, and there is a relationship between the Draco and reptilians and the Greys who report to them, as well as what's called, they are kind of packaged together in a terminology called the Luciferian Alliance. They feed on humans and obviously, our blood and our what comes out, which is in essence orgone from the organs and glands, etc., of humans, is considered an aphrodisiac to these species, and also a desire to control and conquer worlds. So the Pleiadians have fought them in the past, and it's also significant that, as I've said before, that the Anunnaki were taken over also by this reptilian agenda and by the Draco. And so what you have at this time is a Draco Anunnaki hybrid race. And this is often where Anunnaki are considered or thought to be reptilian, when in reality they are a humanoid species that were taken over by the Draco many eons ago. And the Draco are helping China to obtain their goal of eliminating a certain portion of their population at this time. So there is a sense that we have invaders at the gates. And the CV, as I'll just call it for short, is really a side show to the real invasion scenario, and it is happening here on Earth and in the Orion Galaxy. Earth is seen as a kind of Vietnam, according to Mark, where the invasion of spider beings he's talked about in the past, the real reason for the Vietnam War was going on. I believe he was trying to tell me that that scenario is still active here, and that possibly we are being subject to this kind of an invasion as well. So in other words, we're talking about invasions of various species of aliens who are not just content with genetically engineering us and creating their own sort of human hybrids, but on top of it want to take over the planet. So that requires a step-by-step agenda. They're using this as a distraction to distract humans from the invasion scenario, and we are being used. So again, those invaders, or the group of them, might be seen as displayed in AI and ETs. And the Nazca aliens, the 6 alien AIs, the Rendlesham aliens that may or may not have been spider beings, they certainly weren't humanoid. So then we have ET, extra interdimensionals, some positives, obviously the negative ones are invading, and then the Luciferian agenda involving the Draco reptilians and the Greys who report to them. So there is an AI game that I brought to Mark's attention in which the red AI were told to eliminate the blue. What eventually happens is the red AI end up going outside the parameters of the game, and this is a very dangerous situation that occurs. And he said, Mark said, this has happened in a lot of their scenarios that they've done, and the military are very on guard for this. Generals know they have to keep a low-tech human element involved in every system, and that includes Skynet, by the way. And this is so that AI can't take it over, and it is a very real threat. The Black Knight satellite that the British have out there is a low-tech, old-tech version satellite, and it can also let them know when an alien or AI takeover is in progress of that system. There's also, I just want to highlight, I used to work as a contractor in the media, the area of media, at JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab. And there's a very old-fashioned phone system that I became aware of, and that they keep operational. And obviously this is analog and basically, for, I guess, in the event of an AI takeover. So the Gray Human Hybrid program, people had wanted me to ask Mark more about this, so I did talk to him about it. Obviously, their government has made a deal with Grays having to do with an exchange of technology. This goes back to the days of Eisenhower and is very well known by people in our sector. Now, there was a deal also made to get them to stop abducting U.S. citizens and to focus on south of the border. That indeed is what happened. The Greys have been much more active abducting individuals in Latin and South America as a result over the past 60 years. And this is really why Trump wants to close the border. It has to do with those hybrids coming of age. So those are gray human hybrids. And that was a very successful program on the part of the Greys. And a lot of those individuals want to come back and come to the United States. And this is creating kind of an X-Men scenario having to do with a population that's hard to control. And again, it gets back to the gray reptilian Draco arrangement that has to do with infiltrating and taking over Earth. And there is also still the risk of the Chinese infiltration through our border and underground of that border. And I've actually had a very significant dream that I certainly hope doesn't come true, that it does involve Chinese invading through that border. So, again, the Greys report to the Reps, who report to the Draco. There's an important story that's this sort of story I'm talking about has to do with an X-Men movie called Logan, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. And Latinos and South Americans are closer to, as a what you call a root race. They're closer to the root race, and therefore they are a better genetic sort of basis or more fertile ground for the invasion of the gray genetics. And they, when you do hybridization, it is known you need a very sturdy root stock, and so this is why they concentrated in that area, and you need meaning strong enough to handle without dying the gray DNA. So that's really what's going on there. Mark Richards, was offered a raptor enhancement, and it's a piece of raptor brain that would have been merged with his own, but he declined because he did not want to become part raptor. Even though he works very closely with the raptors, and they are working on the side of humanity at this time. And these are, yes, the velociraptors that Steven Spielberg depicts in the Jurassic, world and the Jurassic movies, and other groups are working on behalf of humanity, having to do with the Pleiadians, the Mantids, gaseous beings near Saturn, and various guardian races. This again gets back to the work of Ashayana Dean and her work interacting with the guardian races, and that's a group of many different kinds of races that are banded together to safeguard this seeding of humanity here on Earth. So there's an emphasis, Mark says, on super soldier enhancements using pieces of animal brains, and they are obviously being augmented individuals, and Aaron McCullum was such a person who was enhanced as a dolphin-human hybrid. Project Camelot, I interviewed him years ago. There's, I think, 2 or 3 interviews with Aaron that you can go on my YouTube channel and just search under his last name, McCullum, or his first name, and you should be able to find with no problem. Then we talked about the death of Forrester. Forrester was the Secretary of Defense and a member of MJ-12 during the time of the Truman administration, and actually one of the originators of MJ-12. He was killed due to the risk that he was going to release information about our ET contact and their presence on Earth. He went a little crazy, the way a lot of individuals do, actually. What happens is high-level military live with their secrets for many, many years, sometimes 40 or more years. Eventually, they want to share them with the rest of humanity or even individuals. This becomes a high risk to the secret space program, needless to say. This is where Project Camelot gets our whistleblowers, in case you're wondering. And Pete Peterson was such an individual. So those of you who have not seen my interview and our interview with Pete Peterson, as well as many other whistleblowers, Henry Deacon came out under his real name, Arthur Neumann, eventually, and many others, including Bob Dean and Clifford Stone, etc. So all of these individuals eventually believe that humans have a right to know, that things are so sort of crucial and dire and urgent here on planet Earth that humanity needs to know what's really going on. And this, of course, is something that the secret space program has been trying to cover up. They think you don't have a right to know. They think you can't handle the truth. And Mark and I have talked about this. Even he was part of that contingent, I guess, until such time as he was imprisoned and decided to fight back. And the way he fights back is by telling me the truth. I get it out there on his behalf, and hopefully you become a lot more enlightened as a result of this information. So in the case of Forrester, who there is a documentary that's coming out about him that I'm going to be interviewing Peter Robbins about, who made the documentary, and we talked about exactly how Forrester died. There have been other people who knew too much, and Forrester was definitely killed, according to Mark Richards, J.F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, William Tompkins, President Nixon, William Cooper, Phil Schneider, Gordon Nevelle, Mr. X. There's so many that these are just a few, and then I list some more. Michael, the Rolling Stone journalist, Michael Hastings. I should add his last name here. David Kelly, the Marconi scientist, and so on. So here on this slide you see that information and more. So regarding Trump and another term, he does believe that Trump will have another term. He says the people running the Democratic side, those running are hopeless, and that the Iowa caucus was proof that the whole thing will be controlled, that they are not going to allow any of those running to succeed. Of course, our elections have been controlled for time, forever. Especially since the Kennedy assassination. So from then on, you can be guaranteed that we have not had free elections. However, what happened with Trump, and I've talked about this many times, has been a hacking back from the Hillary side that was hacking the election to begin with, of the election. So that's how Trump came in power, being backed by a certain portion of the military. So Mars is a huge issue. In order for us to defend ourselves, we have to control the moon and Mars. We used to own Mars, according to Mark, and without control of those two planets, we cannot continue to go interstellar. So those are crucial with regard to that. Regarding Randy Kramer's The Super Soldier and Mars, he acknowledges that Randy Kramer is likely the real thing. And as far as Randy Kramer and his talk in Yelm, I've talked about this, I've covered this in other videos, but just to revisit it briefly, Randy was talking about a false flag alien invasion that will basically be followed by a kind of a disclosure worldwide and then letting out of free energy, etc., that the military would like to see happen. Mark actually thought that was a good idea, and it was a plan by the military to jumpstart disclosure while appearing to be victors in a war against the worlds, the aliens, and a fake alien group is the only way that they could control the outcome, obviously. I did ask Mark about time in space and on other planets, if time was the same on other planets, and he said it is, and that if you leave here through a wormhole and are instantly on another planet, it will be the same time. The nearest star, Alpha Centauri, is 60 light years away and would take 60 light years to get there. We do have the ability to travel light speed, but it's not worth the time, so we use wormholes. We talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis again because I wanted to get some clarification on the information I'd gotten in the past from Mark regarding that and Nixon's role, etc. And Nixon obviously never got over it, and people are recommended to see the book by Ashton Gray, Watergate, the Hoax. And Nixon had handled the ET situation for Eisenhower and was read in. Nixon was taken down through mind control and an operation orchestrated by these usual suspects, as I call them, names, a couple of the names here, as well as others, obviously. And you can get into that book to see just how it was done. And this involves remote viewing in Scientology. And Scientology, again, is involved with remote viewing, and there are protocols that were followed. Basically, with regard to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which Nixon never got over, there were grays coming in interdimensionally that had to be stopped, according to Mark. and they unleashed some very horrible stuff. He said the Greys were involved totally in that crisis, that it was not about what people thought it was about. In other words, Russian missiles, etc. That was a cover. He talked about the jungles in South America and Africa, saying that the Greys considered jungles here on planet Earth as dangerous, and other aliens do as well, because there's so many strange and different life forms. So that they consider the South America a more friendly environment, and the deforestation and the fires in the Amazon is to make it more conducive for Greys to live there. We talked about Mark's enemies, and he has had enemies, including Michael Aquino, and the Temple of Set is an old enemy of Mark's, he said, and the Bechtel Corporation. Bechtel, the people that run Bechtel, the Bechtel family, apparently these individuals are involved in keeping Mark in prison to this day. That is a very large and influential company, aerospace, obviously. And Mark was brought up not to view witchcraft in a negative light. And however, he and Michael Aquino, who was very involved, by the way, in the Presidio, and are old enemies. And so that is significant. The Letterman Hospital, we talked again about this. Now, we've talked in the past about the Letterman Hospital. You can go back to previous interviews for some information there. He said it was the site of a massive modern hospital that was heavily involved in mind control, remote viewing, bioweapons, and super soldiers. And it was burned to the ground on purpose by, I believe, our secret space program, because of the things that were let loose there interdimensionally and had to be stopped. And they basically bombed it to close a portal. However, and I don't know if I've got this here. No, I don't. So there is also information that I gave to Mark, because when I come to visit Mark, I stay in San Francisco, and actually kind of playing the tourist for the day before. And in this case, we stayed on Fisherman's Wharf. Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco has become highly dangerous late at night. It is right near the Presidio, and I was basically bringing that to Mark's attention, because it is possible that there is a portal there that has been reopened since the time Mark is talking about. And my partner and I became very aware of how very dangerous that area is, as I say, late at night, which is most unfortunate. Regarding the death of Soleimani, he said he was trying to access the gates between Iran and Iraq and give access to certain beings who wanted to come into this dimension. This is the real reason he had to die. He basically wanted to rule Iran and to let those beings in, just as Saddam Hussein, who was deposed prior to that for the same reason, that Saddam was letting in Anunnaki and certain beings that simply wasn't going to be allowed, and that the Trump administration would not have gotten involved in such a PR debacle, but they had to stop Soleimani. Regarding the inner earth, I talked with Mark about the inner earth. There's some interesting developments there surrounding a book, number 5, of the Romanian journalist Radu Cinema. And I have had contact with Romanians when I do my Awake and Aware conference in England, and for some reason it's attended by at least 3 Romanians every year, and we have deals, our government and governments of the world, with inner earth beings and civilizations. Some are now willing to communicate with topsiders, as we're called, and this is written about in the book number 5, which is called Inner Earth by Radu Cinema. I wanted Mark to be aware of it. I wanted to get his take on those inner earth civilizations. he believes there are inner Earth civilizations in what he calls the mantle. And I also referenced another book, which I have sent these books to Mark to read as well, having to do with the installation under the Romanian Sphinx that Mark is aware of, and those 6-foot tables that contain the ability, the holograms, which can read your body of the user, and basically can also show resulting species if not combined through genetic manipulation. That's one of the things that these tables show, indicating to me that the race of beings involved in building those tables, although they may be from inner Earth, obviously were involved in genetic manipulation. So that was interesting. Mark does not buy into the idea of inner Earth seas, however, but according to Radu Sinamar, they are real. And there is a point at which when you go into inner Earth, you also go interdimensional. So it's a very key concept, and I think needs to be looked at very carefully. Protecting ongoing operations. There were actually questions I asked Mark this time that he wouldn't answer, saying he didn't want to endanger current operations. Sean David Morton, regarding his book Sands of Time series and the fact that Sean is being tortured in prison. He's in Texas now. He's been moved to a Texas prison, and he has been, as I say, tortured, and that is documented on his blog, on Sean's blog, on my website, which is under guest blogs. So if you're interested in hearing the details of that, and I talked to Mark about why Sean was being tortured, and he says they may eventually try to kill him. Obviously, they're trying to get at the witness, the testimony that was given to Sean by his lawyer through this other lawyer of an individual who ran Area 51 and S4, and basically became a time traveler after that. And I guess that individual is trying to disclose information through Sean's books, doing a very good job of it, and Mark agrees. Sean was about to release actually book 4 in his Sands of Time series, and was working on that when Sean was thrown in prison. I believe this is to stop the release of the information, because book 4 was going to have a lot to do with time travel. Mark said that he read actually Sands of Time, and that they contain some striking truths. And basically they may be trying to persuade Sean to discredit himself before they will release him. And I've sent this information to Sean. And basically he said that in prison they can get away with doing whatever they want. With regard to William Tompkins, Mark said he knew too much, just like Forrester, and couldn't be controlled. Mark says he is amazed that Tompkins' book ever got published, and he agrees that the emphasis on sex in that book was made to make him sound like a nut, and basically used to discredit him as a serious military witness, and Mark agreed. I said I thought that Tompkins was probably killed. He was quite elderly, but he was also doing fine when I saw him. And Mark seemed to, he didn't say yes or no on that question, but his silence could have indicated that he agreed. The problem with humans is that they're not waking up fast enough, according to Mark, and he says that they are going to be dupes for what's coming down in the future if they don't wake up. And lastly, regarding Trump's family, Mark says he believes the women in Trump's family are not human. So, and that was basically, I think that's my last slide, yes. And so that is, that's it for the Mark Richards Total Recall number 12 this time. Hope you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned to Project Camelot. Okay, so I just want to make people aware that I have released just actually, I think it was a week and a half ago or so, my book, Rebel Genes, Secret Space, and the Future of Humanity. It contains my trip down the rabbit hole for the past 15 years as a journalist and investigative reporter and documentary filmmaker. Okay, so it goes into my background in Project Camelot as well as my trip down the rabbit hole. It contains a distillation of witness testimony that I've gotten over the last 15 years, as well as my own interactions with ETs, my downloads, my information that's come to me intuitively on putting the big picture together. And I think you will find it quite fascinating. I encourage you to buy my book either in Kindle or as a print version, paperback. And have to say that it's getting 5 stars, so that's excellent and very good news to me. Happy to talk with people about my book and discuss the various areas that I talk about. I do emphasize ET contact and artificial intelligence. So thank you again for watching and for supporting my work, our work in Project Camelot. And please consider donating. And if you buy my book, that will also help support my work and make it possible for me to do more interviews. And I want to thank everyone for supporting Project Camelot all these years and contributing to our work and making these interviews possible. Take care, and thank you again.